We started Protech in the recession, so there's no better recession proofing. There's only one way, and that's up. Otherwise, you're risking everything. And it's not just your money. In my case, it's my wife's money as well. So there's a lot more onus on me to be able to come up with the goods, so to speak, because there's other people's interest in as well. What I'd say is, if you've got a plan, write it down. You know what your skill set is, weigh it up, and above it all else, back yourself, believe in yourself, and just push forward. And as I said, some days you're going to get knocked around and wonder what the hell you're doing. You just got to keep getting off the stool and get back out there and push forward, because as a wise man once said to me, the darkest hour comes before the dawn, and you don't know where your rock bottom is until you get to it, and you never know when it's going to turn. It's like the gamblers that never want to leave the gambling machine because the next person might come in and put in one coin and win all their money. You never know when your luck's going to change, so you just got to stay in the fight sometimes, and you never know when things are going to turn, and you'll be looking back on it, and hopefully that's all part of the journey and makes for a good story over a beer or two in years to come.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Ways to Wealth. Today I'm joined by Ray. Ray, why don't you give us the too long didn't read on how you got here?
Righty-o then. Thanks very much, Charlie, and good to be here. Thanks for inviting us up. I guess a quick summary of who I am and what we do is, my name's Ray Freeman. I'm the founder and director of Protech Solutions Limited. We're an integrated security solutions business specialising in service streams for both security, physical frontline security, and also commercial cleaning services. So where the models come from is I've spent a lot of time overseas, particularly in Australia, and found the value between integrating both services, particularly within the facility services industry. So we're entering our second year of business, probably about 15 months old at the moment, starting in November 23. We've got around 50 guards currently on board at the moment, really based in the Bay of Plenty, but just looking to push out now into other areas, really more likely the Waikato and now up into Auckland as well. And working with some of our Australian clients on big commercial cleaning.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah.
That's cool. I mean, we kind of got halfway through a podcast, or not even halfway, before we had some internet issues.
Absolutely.
So it's good to be in person and having a chat.
Yeah, much better.
No latency, no robots.
No buffering.
No. But I think your story of coming here in the recent past and your kind of introduction into the business landscape in New Zealand was inspired from what you learned in Australia.
Absolutely.
But I mean, I think it's just to quickly touch on it. You're reaching, I think, one of the first teething points and milestones that a business encounters, which is the 2-year mark.
That's right.
2 years kind of often a bit of a make or break for a lot of businesses, because it's hard to start a business, and then 2 years it's a marathon. And I think that often businesses, I think, are thought of as sprints, and it's not a sprint. It's definitely long distance, right? If you want to be able to be in the game for a long time. So congratulations on obviously getting close to that first milestone.
Of course, it's all self-funded. So I've been on the noodles diet for a while, lost a bit of weight.
Yeah, well, that's good.
That's okay. Not shy of a bit of hard work. I guess the difference now for me personally is that rather than doing this for other businesses and other business owners, we're doing it for ourselves. And as much as there's, as we know, 80,000 people left New Zealand to go to Australia last year alone, it's important that I think some of the good operational minds, coming home at the moment and actually getting involved in the fight for the future of this country.
Totally. Yeah. It's kind of almost like a conceding to like the grass is greener kind of scenario, but also makes a lot of sense. Of
course,
if you can go and earn in US dollars or Australian dollars or pounds, it gives you a little bit of a leg up against your, the individual that stays here. Ultimately, I think young people that want to try and get ahead, the obvious solution seems to often be, do I go overseas for 5 years and create a bit of a nest egg and come back and kind of that gets me maybe 10 years of grinding away here almost.
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
Which is a shame, right? And how do you incentivize a country to try and keep that talent here, because ultimately, like you said, it's the operators that can run businesses and want to run businesses that are going to provide you ultimately a productive economy that can then, provide prosperity to the country. And you can't have a prosperous country without, productivity and productive businesses that can compete nationally, but also globally. So it's good that you came back and learned and brought what you learned back to the country from Australia. And you've got connections with those Australian companies that it's going to help you win business here.
That's right.
But were you, like, you mentioned this, and you mentioned the last podcast too, so it's something that's probably a little bit dear to your heart in terms of, and it's not bad to be an employee, it's great, you can learn, etc. But like, has there been a recent shift around your views around ownership? Because you were a bit of a career body for a while, you learned a lot from great experience. Now you're like, well, no, I want to do it for myself. Was that because it was long hours and high stress anyway? And
I think so.
the incremental stress is probably maybe not that much to go and own it yourself as well? Or was there a thought around future retirement? What was the kind of motivating factors?
I think, once you've bounced around a bit within that corporate sector, you continually adapting yourself to other people's styles and other, business operational styles. And it's quite nice to, as much as business leadership ultimately will define your workforce, and I've always been an executive of different capacities over the years in different businesses, and had that flow-on effect to my greater team. It's quite nice now for me to be for the top of that, if you like,
Right.
and our operational style to reflect what I'm wanting from the outset, to be in complete control of that. I think being your own boss is ideally where you want to be, but in saying that, it's a big risk. As I said earlier, it's self-funded. So, when you're putting, hundreds of thousands of dollars, on the line to chase a dream, it is fraught with danger. So, I think that probably the best way to go about it is to not to have a back door. The only way to approach it is to push forward,
Right.
and keep kicking open the doors in front of you, and keep looking for those doors and keep kicking them open, and just back it up with service. And I think if you do that, generally speaking, you'll probably be there or thereabouts.
Yeah, that resilience piece is massive, right?
Yes.
I'd say that a lot of startups fail really when the founders have nothing left to give, especially when you're going 0 to 1. And it's not to say that starting a traditional business is easier, because it's not. It's more competitive in some ways. There's already incumbents. But in some regards of operating, there's a little bit of a guide. But going, like in this example of going from 0 to 1 in the startup world, it's so uncertain, like you say, eventually it's a bit of a fatigue. Whereas, like you say, you need to kind of just keep making progress. Mine first jiu-jitsu coach told me that I should just go and make 1% improvement every day on who I am. And 1% doesn't seem like a lot, but you do that every day for a year. That's massive. I wish I could get gains like that. 1% a day would be incredible in my investment returns, right? So that kind of persistence is something that every business owner just needs. And where do you think you learned that from?
Well, the last 10 years, there's been so much water under the bridge, all different colours, especially in Australia, dealing with all sorts of different disasters, whether it be, floods, bushfires, pandemics, both from a security perspective and a cleaning perspective. There's, it gives you a pretty wide view of how things operate and the importance of essential services.
Yeah, right.
But I guess coming home was the main thing was being locked out of your own country through COVID. especially in Australia. You had little borders around little countries. All states and territories had their own borders and so on. So it's quite nice to come home and be able to go and see people as and when need to, whether it be funerals or weddings or what have you, significant occasions, be able to just jump in the car and do it. So it's not everything's about money.
No, totally. Well, and a lot of business owners that we speak to, and even non-business owners like, executives, often it comes down to, we used to ask this quite regularly and then we stop because we got the picture. Right? And wealth is, for most people, I translate that to happiness, is freedom. Freedom to choose, freedom to operate autonomously, independently, have some freedom of thought, right? I think what the pandemic showed was a huge constraint on that, right? Fundamental constraint on that it would imposed.
Some terrible stories.
Which now ultimately is going to have trickle-on effects that, our kids and such will have to deal with. And we will have to deal with for the next 10 to 15 years.
I think that's probably the biggest unsaid sacrifice of going overseas and chasing money is that you do lose that family connection, that connection with home. When we're in Australia, for example, even though we own homes and so on, we never really felt like they were more of a house than a home.
Right.
It's nice to come back here, and even though the house we live in at the moment is not our long-term house, it is a home. And if we went to move again, it's still a bit of dirt here at home. So you feel a lot more attached to it than what you would owning property overseas.
Yeah. No, it's interesting, right? Because home is where the heart is. And sometimes that can be where you're from. And sometimes that can be elsewhere, right? I think about it. We've been in New Zealand for like 12 years. And we went to the UK 2023 and it wasn't home. There was a weird culture shock associated with going back. It didn't feel right. And it felt, but also very familiar. Like an extremely familiar, nostalgic area. And I think it's all mindset, right? Because I could have went there with a different mindset and my perspective would have been quite different probably.
Okay.
Or two people could have gone there in a similar circumstance and be like, I'm home again.
Yeah.
Whereas we were like, ooh, this definitely doesn't feel like home. And, but I get also what you're talking about around that sacrifice of relationship or family sacrifice of, not having that support system or when you see that gradual change of a family member or an individual when you're there with them every day. But then if you do that 6-month stint, sometimes it's a huge shift. Whoa,
that's right.
Whoa, it's really changed as we get older and as people are not well. So you do make a big sacrifice when you move overseas, not just for yourself, but also your family. They're not sacrificing, but in a sense they miss out. I think about some of the family members I'm very close to. They missed out on 12 years of kind of relationship.
So that said, Charlie, you went back in 23. It didn't feel like home anymore. You have no ambition to go back?
No.
So this is home to you now?
Yeah.
Good on you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We got 3 kids and a dog now. So.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's fairly well settled
and
well established.
I think sometimes it's circumstantial, right? But man, you're so different from your early 20s. Like I moved because ultimately I was pretty disenfranchised with the UK and a little bit like I wanted to create something better for myself and for my family when I created them. So I was very focused on that. And I was naive because I was actually probably bordering on acutely judgmental. And then you live, right? Then you get a bit older, then you go through life and you go, actually, it's not all stability and we're all human. I wrote in my journal the other day, our heroes are human, right? So they have flaws. We all have flaws and we all have to go through different stages of our life. So I guess I've kind of over time been like, well, maybe it's a perspective thing, but shifting for me was an amazing opportunity and for my family to have a bit of a difference. And I guess because we moved at such a pivotal age, perhaps it feels like home because of that. And also I came to New Zealand for a very small stint when I was 15 and then when I was 18 for a year each.
Okay.
So I really loved school here. I really loved Auckland Grammar. I actually got on well there, and I really thought the schooling system was better here than the UK. And then when I was 18, I was already in love with New Zealand.
Okay.
And then being able to now come and forge a little bit of a life.
So you went back to the UK and you couldn't wait to come back again.
Yeah, for sure. I was just planning to go,
Yeah.
every time.
Yeah.
And it was the culture for me here. Is just we can have conversations like this, and I think that there's that openness to have a conversation here that maybe doesn't exist in the same way in the UK, especially with a kind of quite traditional class system. So I think that was something that drew me to New Zealand, was that openness to have a conversation. It doesn't necessarily lead to anything or have to lead to anything. Just the ability to just converse in a relatively level playing field was quite appealing.
Yeah, it's how do you find, when you're talking about the class system and things socially here, and within the business sense, how does that compare to the UK? What I'm referring to is how fickle New Zealand is. The tall poppy syndrome, for example.
Yeah, we thought
Small economy, only 5 million people, smaller market.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of there's always the conversation of the size, and I think it's a bit of a limiting belief. So we don't have to always talk about how small we are, right? And I find it interesting, right? Because you have this tall poppy syndrome, which is basically, hey, keep remembering that you're small, right? I think that's really the essence of it. Whereas in the UK, it was more like, well, you actually don't deserve to even be at the table. Whereas in New Zealand, it's a little bit more like, oh, you're now being a little bit too above our station, our collective station. So let's not do that.
Okay.
Whereas in the UK, it's a bit more like complete, don't even try to be an entrepreneur. Don't even go and do it because you're just going to fail. Whereas here, it's like success is, to a certain degree, is obviously massively kind of supported, advocated for, and giving it a go, I think is quite quite ingrained here.
But don't do too well.
But don't try and conquer the world.
Yeah.
That's not what we're about. And I think that's a bit of a shame, because what it does is it's self-fulfilling. It's like, well, do we want to be a productive nation that can punch above our weight and provide prosperity to the country because we're able to, in technology or certain sectors, compete globally?
Well, it's always been known very much so as an innovative country, and one of good ideas. But I think myself, I've had people offer me advice since I've been back here and starting the business, and saying, hey, look, let people into your struggle. Don't be shy to talk about your struggle. But I'm not really that way inclined. I'm a little bit more glass half full than glass half empty. So instead, you start to look like you're doing better than what you should be doing, and people try and pull that back. So you tend to become a little bit more aloof. You're not so socially interactive, or if you are, you notice that the response you're getting from people is a little bit resistant to supporting you doing well, and of more of a mind where, especially in business and my career to date, it's people want to back winners. You don't want to back the wrong horse, right? So you want to back a winner. And so, it's one thing to betray that you're on the front foot. It's another thing to do it. And, you don't necessarily want to be beating yourself up for doing well.
No, not at all. And I think it's interesting, right? Because again, it comes back to that small market syndrome of they're feeling like there's not enough. The great thing about, I think, finance specifically is actually it's on a relative basis, it's quite there's a lot of opportunity, and they'll all from a competitive landscape in the finance space, because there are these large players, and it's actually talking to innovation and such, and ownership, which is really important, is you're kind of seen as a toy. And typically in the finance space, because it's so capital intensive, and actually in the whole startup scene in New Zealand, an ecosystem itself of startups, is that as founders, we give away too much too soon because we're told, well, don't get too big. So we make too many concessions. And in finance, it's especially the case where you might have a founder with next to no equity in 10 minutes because strategically, early on, they're actually kind of accepted, seen as a toy, but then acquired very quickly, or ownership is taken out of that business really quickly. And then when that compounding effect really starts to take place, the original founders and the people that could have really changed their lives in a dramatic way, and they could have then changed their communities, may have given away too much.
That's a very interesting point.
So, and that actually comes back to the systemic problems in New Zealand around financial services. It's the most expensive country in the world to consume financial products, our country.
Okay.
Why?
Yeah. Because the dollar's so weak?
No, it just stems from the bank.
Okay.
So the banking system has these huge margins, and they have this huge monopoly, and then they set the price at the kind of cheapest cost of capital. And then there's a relative premium on every single layer of capital after that. And because you don't have that scale as well. So the banks have set the kind of the culture and set the scene, and then it permeates all the way through to startup capital, where, if you want to raise money for a startup, it's going to be one of the most expensive places to raise in the world. So it really stems from that base. And so that base needs to ultimately be disrupted in order to deliver financial services at a more cost-effective rate.
Well, that's a pretty big point. So how would you see that happening, or that disruption?
Well, it has to. Well, so I think that we're moving now, and I think the election in the US really cemented it in my mind culturally, of the creator economy and independent niches and independent products gaining more traction. So I think how you solve that is you have more independent financial services that can attach themselves to strong niches, focus on ownership because you need control, and then to start incrementally taking market share.
Okay.
Like, so for example, with us, I mean, I don't know any bank that's currently offering a yielding USD account. We do. So it's that small win, right? It's not all the capital's not coming to our doors necessarily, but if we can find some niches in our case and other people's cases, I know that there are some neobanks that are trying to do innovative things. So I think the creator economy space and these niche products, I think that's how you create more competition and basically lower the cost to consumers over time.
Okay.
And that brand building, right, of individuals like this, like we're doing now.
I seems so much more traditional and old-fashioned. Embarrassing.
Not really. Well,
Security and cleaning services.
yeah, but you know what I love about that business is that it's cash flow. Like, if you can do it right, the cash flow is nice. And I say it too often, but Charlie Munger would say that cash flow is oxygen, and Carl Icahn would say that free cash flow is happiness. So I think, again, going back to the banks, I don't hate to rag on the banks. I enjoy it thoroughly. But the banking system, basically in New Zealand, and we do like financial well-being programs for employers, where we go in and say, hey, rather than you get the insurance company in or the KiwiSaver business in or the bank in to talk about mortgages, why don't we come in and actually, without selling any product, help people know where they're at financially? Help them with their budgeting, help them with their forecasting, help them know where they're actually at without selling product. I think there's a big conflict there. And what I've seen is, basically, we've gone in, we talked to like people that earn good money, but they've got no cash. They've got no cash flow. And why? Well, it's because they're consuming way too many financial products that are way too expensive. If you have a mortgage plus a mortgage facility because you're a bit nervous about your job security, and then you have insurances, those two second things are probably both doing the same thing. They're both consumed out of fear. But you do that plus all your other obligations, and all of a sudden you've got no cash flow. So what I love about a traditional business and a good business like yours is cash flow is what builds leverage. Because what you can do is you can get to a good point where you've built this good free cash flow, and then you can use that to invest in either obviously building more cash flow for the business or in productive assets to ultimately help you get to a state where you're financially free. So a lot of financial products, they actually attack your cash flow, right? Because even insurance, which I think insurance is needed in most cases for most people and in the circumstances that you operate, especially if you can't self-insure yourself, which would be the ideal, right? The ideal is actually having enough resources so that you don't need insurance and you actually self-insure yourself. But for many people, myself included, I had some insurance in certain areas because I would like to have that in place.
That's peace of mind.
But it's affecting my cash flow. And there are so many financial products that affect our cash flow. And that's really what's crippling the incremental person in New Zealand right now. Because you go and you get your mortgage. Like we were doing it the other day. There's a guy that I was doing one of these financial wellbeing consultations with, and we were modeling out because he just got pre-approval on a home, and he's a young guy. He's earning an amazing salary, saving about 80% of it.
80.
80.
Good on him.
Right?
Jeez.
Amazing. Earns a good salary, has a great job, does good work, has built up this massive cash pile, and he got pre-approval on a 10% mortgage though, and then he was going to go from being 80% saving 80% of his cash of his salary of his take home to zero. So
completely clean them out.
And we modeled it, right? And I said, well, if you used a diversified set of ETFs based on historical data, this is what you're looking at in terms of net asset value in X amount of time versus a mortgage. That it's pretty competitive. But not only that, what about the happiness of having 0% left over at the end of the month versus 80? Because that happiness sacrifice is quite acute, right?
Oh, yeah.
And then he came back to me because the way we work is we kind of have this membership model. So we're not incentivized to sell product, but we're incentivized to just say, to give someone to talk to, right? In that kind of piece. And he goes, oh, I'm going to buy a business. And it's a profitable business, and I'm going to take that cash flow and then invest the cash flow. And if I want to then quit my job and go traveling, that cash flow will cover my expenses. So he's going to leverage this, what would have been a deposit, and he's now looking at buying a productive business, a productive asset with it that's going to generate him cash flow. And I'm like, that's incredible, right? In theory. Now, obviously there are, but he's ran a business before.
Okay.
Profitably, and he's a smart cookie. So it's not like everyone's going to be like the archetype of this human.
That's right.
This human. He's a special individual, very smart.
Yes.
But just because I don't think there's necessarily a right answer, but just having that,
rather than putting all your eggs in one basket,
and also just having a view that there's more than one path. Because I think we often think, especially in my generation, a lot of people feel disenfranchised and like they can't get ahead, and it's because there's been this kind of, we've been told that there's this way, but there are many ways.
That's true.
And I think that's the main thing to think about is there's quite a few ways to skin a cat, and we shouldn't all be trying to
I agree.
pile into one path because all of our paths are different. And we should be optimizing for happiness, and I think happiness just happens to be connected to having a bit more than you spend.
I agree, and I think the beauty of what you're saying is, relating to myself personally more recently, is that sometimes as you get older, you think, geez, if only I knew then what I know now.
Totally.
Talking about the ETFs and dividend stocks, you would have been into those 10, 15, 20 years ago, than looking at fast tracking them now, to get yourself into that position to have that passive income. To be able to fund a healthy retirement. I get you. I hear what you're saying. Really interesting times we're living in. That you going from the old traditional model of the bricks and mortar, getting yourself into a house and paying off the mortgage and having your insurances just in case you were to be struck by lightning, protecting your family and work stuff, and having a different option. I hear.
Yeah, it's nice to explore different ideas. You know, like I want to go and eat with different cultures. I want to go learn from other people's wisdom. Right? We can I kind of believe, and I'm a technologist, right? So I get it. Like we are living in an interesting time. Technology's always moving. The world's always moving. We're all human. We all live a roughly similar range of kind of existence on the planet, and our circumstances are relatively similar throughout the entire kind of human life cycle. Do you know what I mean?
That's right.
Like we can learn from previous wisdom, and we should embrace different cultures, so that we can just learn that collective wisdom, and we don't need to take it all in and say I agree with it. But it's good to hear it. You know, that's how you get ahead. And then, so for you and the business and kind of going forward, like, did you have a bit of a grand plan when you started it?
Well, I think to a certain extent, service, you're talking about being a disruptor, and I understand the disruptor in your industry, and you've fairly well explained it. Since coming back into New Zealand, I've seen that the service industry is in need of a disruptor, and that's largely due to whether it be a COVID hangover or just the fat cat companies that are basically left here have dictated terms and don't really go over and above anymore for the money that they're earning.
Yeah.
And it's made it a very complacent marketplace. So if anything, I've seen that as an opportunity to come into the industry as a disruptor in that respect.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm looking to do. The over and above, the old school, the way of doing business, having people that are invested into the business, being part of something, paying them a little bit more than minimum wage, as a lot of employers do. And have the churn and burn culture of their staff, looking after people, having less turnover, and having an enthusiastic and stable workforce going into doing jobs that they're literally personally invested in, and they feel part of something, and being looked after and rewarded for that and for their efforts. Now we're starting off, security and cleaning was always the intent in that order, and that's the way we're looking to continue. We'll look to push out into cleaning more in the near future, but at the moment it's still just bedding down that foundation with security. And security is good because it's client, it's public facing. You're out there, it's credibility. All your guards are licensed. They've all been through background checking and so on. And I've always been of the mind, especially in our hospitality and event security teams, if you can deal with people that are under the influence,
Right.
in an ever-changing environment, you can do any sort of work. You can do anything. It's so, you've got so many, just such a broad skill set then. You can deal with any type of security. So,
Well, I think that approach of trust and connection in business is coming back.
I
You know,
think so.
and that kind of goes back to that point that I was saying about the creator economy and these more niche businesses,
That's right.
is that the conglomerate's kind of getting disrupted, to your point. And I think that's really healthy. And I think that's going to provide a dynamic environment.
I'll give you an example, Charlie. If you go into a bar, you go into your regular bar on the weekend, and the doorman knows you by name, you're more likely to continue to go there, aren't you?
Yeah.
You're more likely to actually inquire as to what his name is, so you can establish a personal relationship. And you go there, you might want to go and drop your girlfriend or your wife off there early, and then go off to another bar because she's going to be safe there. The doorman's going to look after her. How many businesses know who their cleaner is? Not many, because they're coming after hours.
Yeah.
Being able to put names to faces and to those functions in the workplace is something I'm quite passionate about. And no matter what I've done in my corporate career before, I've always been a big advocate that sometimes the bigger businesses get, the more distant they become to what's happening on the ground. So I've always made it a priority to just engage with people at all levels, learn their names, And so you can speak with them regardless of their role or level of responsibility. And so in turn, that comes back that people realise that you actually give a stuff about what they do. They actually care and respect them, right? So it just reflects really well in all facets of the business. So I think I'd like to be able to come back and have a catch up with you in another few years.
Yeah.
And give you a little bit of an update on how business is going if you can't see it for yourself out your window, because we want to be everywhere, because I think that's really been lost in the economy at the moment, is people actually caring about what they do.
Yeah, totally. So then going to that point then, like, what is success for you in 5 years with the business, Protech?
Well, I think, it's a bit of a cliche to say it's not all about money. Of course,
No.
we're not in business not to make money. So I think it's important, but I think to a certain extent, it's important that you reinvest back into the business and into your people. And if you can start to build a good, depth of talent within your business that doesn't turn over as much as other businesses, people tend to look to stay with you for a prolonged period of time, if not for a career. I think that's a pretty good compliment. And if something that it's bigger than you, it could last the test of time.
Yeah.
I think that's ultimately success. But to me, over and above that, I think enjoying what you do. To me, it's it's a bit of a personal cliche for me. It's looking for those little bits of gold, looking for those little fist pump moments in your operations. Getting that little text message from the police or from one of your clients that they really appreciated that what you did here and there, or just one of a customer or a member of the public coming up to you on the weekend and saying, you guys really are the best at what you do. I always love coming here because you are the difference.
Yeah.
That's something I think it's good to promote.
Yeah, I love engendering that kind of culture of excellence and humanity.
Yeah.
Human, that's excellent, right?
100%.
You do those two things and you survive, you make a little bit of progress every day.
Yeah.
And you'll see, okay, over a couple of weeks, you might not see the difference, but you do that for 2 years, it compounds. I think two things that, Einstein said that compound interest is the eighth wonder of the world. But compound interest works in relationships and it works in incremental progress. And I think it's underestimated in these two places. It's actually underestimated in capital as well, because we're not very good at actually doing long-term compounding without a calculator or a spreadsheet. So it's hard to do. But actually the relationships compound, like talk about building your people up. For me, I'm like, well, I'm going to be a realist and say, I don't know, I can't impact and make the world a fair place. But what I can do is I can impact the community around me and my people and my team and lift them up.
That's right.
Because I'm only one person. But if I can focus on my sphere of influence,
what you can control,
I'll have greater influence overall, and I won't be kind of stuck in this, well, if I can't help everyone, I won't help anyone. And I think there's a lot of that kind of mentality around everything should be fair. Or we should make everything fair, which just means that we end up talking about what's not fair for a long time. We don't actually end up maybe being able to have the impact we could have. No, I think that I've always been a big believer of grassroots kind of community, grassroots kind of arenas, because my background was in gaming, which started very grassroots, and jiu-jitsu as well, which was very grassroots, and now it's got a lot bigger. Same with MMA.
It's because you're on the ground.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, totally.
I was always stand up.
Oh yeah. So what did you train?
Well, I used to fight professionally, both boxing and kickboxing.
Okay, you did kickboxing
for years, and Muay Thai.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, but it's one of those things. I fought for 10 years and retired at 27.
Oh yeah,
because I had too much work to do, and I didn't want anyone noticing my face and like I'd been a fighter, so no one even would know.
Right. Yeah.
Well, looking at me.
Yeah. Well, the great thing about jiu-jitsu is you can go and
you're rolling.
You can really go, and you're not going to be too hurt. Well, there are some pretty unfortunate injuries you can get, but
exactly.
Training is it's like surfing. It's just, for a business owner, I think, or someone that thinks deeply, it's a way to rest the mind. Free.
Oh, very much so. You gotta love the gym. You never feel worse leaving the gym.
No, and I've for the last few months not been training because I just haven't had the time. But typically I'll train every day. I'll get in there and I'll just train at lunchtime. Or I'll go and roll.
7 days?
5 to 6.
Yeah.
So usually I wouldn't go on a Sunday.
No.
But yeah, 5 to 6 is what I aim for. The reality is I'll do 4 when I'm in a good rhythm.
Okay.
But on a good week I can do 5 or 6. But yeah, training's been a great benefit to me for sure. I love training. Love that adversity you get from fighting. It's like business and fighting are like the two primary arenas, right? Where there is no bullshit.
Just got to get off the stool, as I say. Yeah, it's like life or business is like a 12-round fight, for example.
Yeah.
Some rounds get knocked around. Sometimes you go back to your corner and you're sitting on the stool and you're so bashed up that you don't know if you can get up off your stool. You just got to keep getting off the stool.
Yeah.
Get back out there, stay in the fight.
Totally agree. So, as someone that's been through the ringer, literally, but also been in the corporate world and now taking it into their own hands in the business world, what would you say to someone that's trying to go out there and make a difference for themselves as well today? And I think, you emigrated at the same time as basically starting a business, pretty much. There wasn't too much of an overlap. What would you say that now that you've been through it, were there maybe a couple of things you overlooked that you wish you didn't?
Well, I think really, as I said, you don't want to create a back door for yourself because you got one foot out it.
Yeah.
So we started Protech in the recession. So there's no better recession proofing. There's only one way, and that's up. Otherwise, you're risking everything, and it's not just your money. In my case, it's my wife's money as well.
Yep.
So there's a lot more onus on me to be able to, come up with the goods, so to speak.
Yeah.
Because there's other people's interest in as well. But what I'd say is, if you've got a plan, write it down. You know what your skill set is. Weigh it up, and above all else, back yourself, believe in yourself, and just push forward. And as I said, some days you're going to get knocked around and wonder what the hell you're doing. You just got to keep getting off the stool and get back out there and push forward, because as a wise man once said to me, the darkest hour comes before the dawn, and you don't know where your rock bottom is until you get to it, and you never know when it's going to turn. It's like the gamblers that never want to leave the gambling machine, because the next person might come in and put in one coin and win all their money.
Win the jackpot.
You never know when your luck's going to change. So you just got to stay in the fight sometimes, and you never know when things are going to turn, and you'll be looking back on it, and hopefully that's all part of the journey and makes for a good story over a beer or two in years to come.
Totally. Awesome. Well, yeah, I often say you got to put yourself in a position where you can get lucky.
Yeah, create your own luck.
And we have a thing in our organization, live to trade another day.
There you go.
And that is, as long as you're in the game, as long as you don't end the game, as long as you're not out, as long as you get off the stool, you'll have a far better chance. And like you say, it's worth it for the journey. I think we think too much about outcomes, not about the process, right? Anyway, it's been awesome. I can't wait to have you back on.
Yeah.
Great couple of years.
Great to be here, Charlie, and thanks for having us.
Yeah, awesome, Ray. Thank you so much.
Invited.
Yeah, cheers.